1921 was the Child Welfare League of America, and it was founded in 1921. It was had an important place in history of adoption regulation. It focused on child placement policy, believed in child welfare, and had standards for record keeping, personal training, and financial management, as well as practice placement. 1935, the Social Security Act was enacted, and this provided provision for aid to dependent children, crippled children's program, and child welfare. Moving on to 1939, there was a book written called The Chosen Baby. This book talked about how to discuss adoption with your adopted child. 1948 was the first ever transracial adoption, and this took place by two white parents adopting an African American child. In 1974, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act began, and this act has been amended a variety of times over the course of history, but it provided minimum standards for defining physical abuse, neglect, and sexual abuse. All states had to incorporate this in order to receive federal funds. In 1978, a kind of controversial act was enacted. The ICWA made adoption of Native American children by non-Native people very difficult. They erected sort of barriers to adoption, and it remains a source of ongoing controversy among civil rights and children advocates. In 1980, the Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Act was enacted. It offered significant funding to states who would help to get children with special needs adopted. 1988 was the Child Abuse Prevention, Adoption, and Family Services Act. It broadened the scope of research on and investigation into child abuse, and it also established a way to track data and expanded a lot of adoption opportunity programs. Let's see. 1994 was the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act. It's the first federal law to concern itself with race in adoption, and it prohibited agencies from receiving federal funds for denying transracial adoptions. 1997 was the Adoption and Safe Families Act, and it really stressed the importance of permanency planning for children. So this was really important for history. It talked a lot about getting children out of the foster care system and finding them permanent placements. 2000 was the Inter-Country Adoption Act, and this allowed certain foreign-born children who were adopted to immediately acquire U.S. citizenship. 2003 was the Adoption Promotion Act of 2003, and this was enacted by President George Bush and gave $43 million per year for performance-based incentives to states who were able to get children adopted and had more adoption rates. In 2008, the Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act of 2008, this helped to support caregivers and improve outcomes for children in foster care. It also improved incentives for adoption. Significant laws and policies. The U.S. states have primary responsibility for child welfare services. Each state has its own legal and administrative structure in all programs that address needs of children and families. So out of all of our states, all of them agree on these general ideas. Decision in state proceedings to terminate parental rights must be based on clear and convincing evidence. In all states, adoption proceedings require the biological parents to voluntarily and knowingly consent to the adoption. All states have statutes that require the birth mother to consent to the adoption. Interestingly enough, not all states require the birth father to consent to the adoption. Additionally, all states require children to consent to adoption if they're between the ages 11 and 14, depending on the state. And all states require the best interest of the child to be the first consideration before adoption. Federal law. Under federal law, we believe that parents have the fundamental right and interest in care and custody and management of their children. The Federal Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Act provides federal funding to qualify state foster and adoption assistance programs. The Adoption Safe Families Act of '97 promotes state programs encouraging the adoption of children in foster care. Title 4B, Child Welfare Services and Promoting Safe and Stable Families, is another law that we have. We also have Title 4E, which is the Foster Care Independence Program, and the Social Service Block Grant, which is authorized and provides funds to a range of programs that support various social policy goals. Significant points for social work. Under the achievements, I listed a few of our historical movements, which we talked about under the History tab. So the 1912 Children's Bureau, the 1921 Child Welfare League of America, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, and the Adoption and Safe Family Act. Each of these helped us to move forward into understanding adoption, understanding the rights of a child, preventing neglect, preventing abuse, sexual abuse, and also promoting a permanent home for children. Some of the challenges that we face in adoption are the costs of adoption. That's one of the big ones for people. Private agency adoption can cost up to $45,000. Intercountry adoption can cost up to $50,000. Independent adoption can cost upwards of $40,000. Adopting a child out of foster care, however, involves the very least amount of expense. Also, all domestic and intercountry adoptions must be finalized in a U.S. court. Those can include additional fees of $2,000 for court documentation, and parents may need legal representation, which can be up to another $4,000. Additionally, social work turnover is a big challenge in adoption and foster care as well. The high turnover rates can be due to stress, emotional distress. They feel that they're under-recognized, and these can really hurt families and hinder the adoption process. Additionally, lack of information about the child, so proper paperwork or proper information about the child and any past traumas or behavioral issues. Additionally, lack of services available to the family to help them deal with any of these issues while adopting a child. Current local and or national programs. Some federal programs that we have are Adoption Awareness Training, and this program is for staff or eligible health centers to provide adoption information and referrals to people. We also have Adoption and Legal Guardianship Incentive Payment Programs, which provide incentives to states who are eligible to try to find permanent placement for the children. We have Title IV E-Adoption Assistance, which is essentially a type of funding given to people who are adopting a child with special needs. It helps to reduce the cost of the adoption for them and provide assistance. There's also adoption grants that can be taken out. And some places of employment also can offer help with adopting a child. Current local and national programs. So I selected Pennsylvania where our school is located, and I also selected the state I live in. Both of these I found information by looking through the state's website and child welfare. The first one is the Statewide Adoption and Permanency Network. They provide case advocacy services, support group services, and respite services. Additionally, they have Together as Adoptive Parents, which have resources and referrals available for families in the Pennsylvania area. In my state, we have a variety of support groups which can be found through local hospitals, doctors' offices, and social service agencies. We also have a variety of private agencies. The Maine Children's Home for Little Wanderers and Adoption Partners of Maine are private agencies, and they provide counseling services pre- and post-adoption to families. So interventions at a micro level. One of the biggest things for children who are being adopted is past traumas, and it's important to deal with some of those traumas prior to the adoption. We can do this by using a trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which can help the children to address distorted or upsetting beliefs about their experiences. So for instance, they may mistrust women, or they may mistrust men, or they may believe bad things happen to them, and this can help them to get past that. It also can help them to cope with life stressors and also give them skills to work better and work through those types of stressors. It also can be helpful to the adoptive parent in understanding them. Additionally, there is a trauma and grief component therapy for adolescents. This can be done in group or individual settings, and it can be done in schools, community mental health centers, or clinics. It has 4 models. The first is a psychoeducation model, teaching them about what they're feeling. The second provides a way to help them narrate what has happened to them and share what's happened to them. Next is the customized approach, which can be done after providing an assessment of the child and then tailoring a therapeutic intervention directly to them. Finally, there's the last model, which promotes development and planning for upcoming stressors. So it can kind of give them a toolbox of how to deal with stressors in their life. Again, one of the really big important parts of addressing or working with a child who's going to be adopted is addressing past experiences, so grief and loss, confusion and anger, and also the feeling of divided loyalties between biological and adoptive parents. This can be done through affirmation, listening, creating a safe space, and encouraging expression of those feelings. Additionally, you can create a life book with them, which is essentially a book that they can create of what has happened to them in the life and what they want to happen in the future. You can ask them questions like, what has happened to me, and address that through a loss line, who am I, by doing a life map, and so on and so forth. So a lot of these activities can help them to address how they feel if they can't do it verbally. Additionally, it's important to prepare an adoptive family. You want to know that the family is committed to the child and that the child's adoption into the family is something they want, that they're able to fully integrate the child into their family and not treat them differently, that they have developed and practiced good parenting skills, which would include patience, consistency, and flexibility, and that they have resources and information as well as training for help that they might need. Additionally, having a network of social support is important, and realistic expectations of the child and what they may bring to the relationship. Interventions at a meso level. Before a child can be adopted, a home study must be conducted by a licensed clinical therapist or social worker. It's their job to educate the families about the adoption process, about what potential mental health or developmental achievements they may bring to the family. It's their job to evaluate the home to make sure that the family has a safe home that meets state expectations and requirements. They evaluate the relationships the adoptive parents have. They evaluate sort of their day-to-day life, their employment status, their education status. They run a background check on the parent. They require references. They interview the parents about their beliefs on parenting and other things. And also, it's important to prepare them with some training, and this can help to prevent disruption and dissolution. So educating the parent on the child's background and preparing them for what the settling in phase might be like. Some of the programs that we can implement would be the Preparing Training Prospective and Adoptive Families, and this program can be used by taking online and in-person courses, and it helps children to address child abuse and neglect, attachment issues, and understanding behaviors of the child. It also helps with child development and parenting, and it also works with children who have had a lot of stress or have been sexually abused. The next program that I discussed would be the Permanency Navigation Program, and this one's located in Cleveland. It provides supportive services to help families who are seeking to provide permanent placement. So it's sort of a network of people who are going through similar experiences. And finally, post-adoption support, local support groups are another way. And as a social worker, you can provide with them anything near to them in their area that they could go to talk to other people going through similar experiences. And finally, providing them with a list of references and referrals for mental health things, classes, activities to do with their family can also be important. Moving on to a macro level, it's important to involve a child as part of permanency placement and giving them a platform to advocate for themselves. One example I found was something called In Their Own Words, and this features professionals, youth, and young adults who have experienced adoption, and they're promoting permanency for themselves and for others. And it's giving them a platform to be heard, and it's local and statewide. Adoption competency training policies I think should be required in coursework if you're going to work in child welfare. They should be required to take a certain amount of coursework on these areas and test, particularly in trauma-informed care, foster care and adoption policy and practice, and permanency planning. I also believe providing post-placement adoption services to strengthen the abilities of therapists and